कितना पैसा डाला मेरे एक बार चेक करो। पैसा कोई याद दिया ऊपर आ गया बस कोई याद नहीं क्योंकि हमें सामने से देख रहा हूँ खबर सुनते आते खबर सारी
गुप्ता के ग्रुप में कॉल कर रहे हैं, देखिएगा लगा हो जाएंगे सीधा 1500 आपने कितना पैसा डाला मेरा एक बार चेक करो पैसा को याद किया ऊपर आ गया बच्चों को याद किया क्योंकि हमें सामने से देख रहा हूँ याद किया भी नहीं बच्चों को कहीं खबर उनके आते हैं खबर से सारी आते हैं
Prompt engineers are getting paid 3 crore rupees in United States, and in India they are getting paid 17.5 lakh rupees on an average. What is a prompt engineer? Prompt engineer is basically a person who has art of talking to AI tools like ChatGPT, Midjourney, among others. Hi, I'm Aditya Kachwe. I'm an alumni of IIT Kharagpur. I'm someone who is absolutely passionate about all these AI tools and ChatGPT. And if you want to become prompt engineer, join me for my 3 hours workshop where I'm going to teach you basics of prompt engineering. Along with that, I'm going to teach you multiple AI tools which you absolutely should be knowing so that you will be becoming irreplaceable in the job market. Click on the link below, sign up for my workshop. I'll see you inside my workshop.
Request Dr. Tharoor and Riyadh to remain on stage and kindly take their seats to proceed with the first discussion of the day, which focuses on Gen Z and how they can create a path for themselves with innovation and excellence.
Good morning. So, I think Dr. Tharoor needs no introduction, but I must tell you, when I was first told that I got to chair this interview, and the first topic they chose was about the importance of English and to talk about English with Dr. Tharoor, I almost backed out and I was Googling an AI tool. I was trying to see if there was an AI tool which could replace me to, match his English. But anyway, we kind of simplified that, got it more simpler and talked about education, and that's when I stepped in. So Dr. Tharoor, thank you so much for coming. And he's a good friend of the week at Malayalam Manama Group. So thank you once again, Dr. Tharoor, for coming.
Very good to be with you all. Actually, I've attended a couple of different conclaves on this very stage, and I'm glad to see such a wonderful turnout for an education conclave. It's a hugely important theme you've undertaken. Congratulations to the week.
Thank you, Dr. Tharoor. This is something we're very passionate about. One of the first questions I want to ask you, Dr. Tharoor, was something which was prevalent, definitely in your times, and also in our times when we had, societal pressure and also pressure from the parents about the career paths that you choose, right? At my time, it was doctor, engineer. How would you advise students today about the career path they choose? Should they listen to the parents? Should they fall under the pressure of parents, or should they choose the path that they think will be easy for them? And how difficult is that in a country like India?
Well, I think it's partially the fault of the earlier generation. I was incredibly blessed because I had a father who understood my reluctance to fulfill his fantasies. All parents in India expect their children to do what they couldn't achieve or what they want their children to achieve, rather than what the children want to do. And I think the important thing is today's younger generation, the Gen Z or Gen Z or whatever you want to call them, Gen Z seems to be the preferred pronunciation. They are, I think, very much more conscious of their own interests and wishes, and increasingly parents are beginning to learn to accept that. When I was a kid, I was just inconveniently good at taking exams. I kept coming first in everything. And yet when we were streaming at the end of, in those days we streamed in class 9, I opted for the humanities. And my teachers were so upset, they called my parents to school and said, this is our best science student, why has he chosen humanities? Which of course made my parents turn to me and said, but with science you can be a doctor or an engineer. And I said, I have no desire to be either. And I have to say that when they turned around and said, why don't you do science? And simply said, I'm not interested in the subject. They said, why do you do so well in it? And I say, I do well in everything, in case you've noticed, but I really forget everything I've studied for the science exam the next morning. Whereas you ask me about history or literature, and I can tell you things that I didn't learn in the classroom because I've been reading outside the classroom also. And my father respected that choice, and I went into the potentially unremunerative and uncareer-oriented professions that I chose, which in the end turned out all right, as it happened. Now, I would say the same to the kids. There's another factor, Riyadh, which we have to acknowledge about today's Gen Z, and that is that the very notion of a job, of what you're going to do to work and earn a living, seems to be changing. There's very much more consciousness of the freedom that comes with information technology, the gig economy. I meet so many, I once in a while find myself chatting to a 20-something or a 30-something, early 30-something on a plane, and ask them what they're doing, and a startlingly high number of them are essentially self-employed, and they're doing very well. They're doing everything from coding from home to data management, even online marketing, to all sorts of things. People are creating reels for a profession, and they're making a decent living out of it. Somebody else is zipping around, actually having, by the way, left 2 secure jobs. She told me that she's actually doing better just being on her own, but connecting companies to each other, doing deals for one group or the other. There's a girl barely in her 30s. And I suddenly realized that the whole notion of job security that my generation and possibly yours felt unavoidable, that you actually needed to get into a career, have some predictability, have fixed employment, going to an office, earning a salary, all of that seems to matter very much less to today's younger people. I may be generalizing, and the problem with any conversation where we're talking about an entire category of people is that obviously there are generalizations one makes, but these are observations. What I'm picking up is that certainly if I had these same conversations 20 years ago, I'm convinced everyone would say doctor, engineer, IAS officer, taking the exam to join this, becoming even a teacher, professor, whatever it may be. Everyone would have been oriented towards stable careers. Today, that seems to matter very much less.
ब्लड टेस्ट के पहले आप कुछ नहीं खाते, इसीलिए हम ऑलवेज ऑन टाइम आते।
Another breakthrough in motion.
Write function, copy, paste, repeat. There has to be a better way. Seriously?
What if one moment could change everything?
Join OutSkills AI for Engineers program. Build autonomous AI agents. Learn Crew AI framework.
Master AI automation in 16 hours. From APIs to autonomous agents. Your breakthrough moment begins with this workshop. Don't let this apple fall without catching it.
Having said that, you said matters very much less. But I remember at the same venue a few months ago at the Health Summit, the Week Summit, you mentioned that end of the day, what matters to you is choose a career where you contribute to something, where you contribute to society or to some cause. Could you just tell these students here what you meant by that?
Well, I, from a very young age, been very motivated by the whole notion of making a difference. And that's quite simply, the conversation Riyadh is referring to was with a spiritual fellow. It was Gaur Gopal Das and I talking. So naturally, we were thinking on a higher plane. But when he asked, I said, look, as a kid, actually, I found I was a very severely asthmatic kid. Very often, it's touch and go whether you can breathe at all. And so I asked myself this entire question about life, and as a young kid, I said, why are we on this planet? We're all doomed to die anyway. What's the point of living? And the only answer I could find was that the purpose of living is to make a difference while you're here to those around you. You're also living. I mean, it's as simple as that. And that's what, even though my own instincts in some ways were introverted, were reading oriented, were focused very much on my own ideas and thoughts, I felt from an early age that that would not be worthwhile unless I could connect to others with those thoughts and ideas and make a difference. I started writing at a preposterously young age, scrawling in bed while struggling to breathe. And from then onwards, writing became one way of communicating to others. My father instilled in me the importance of speaking, that if you can influence others through your ideas, or your thoughts, or your reflections, your observations, experiences, that is a very useful contribution to their growth and development. Each person may hear you differently. Each person may derive different things from what you have to say. Each person may also, very frankly, react, like or not like what you said, learn from it or reject it, but that doesn't matter. You're forcing them to think. And all of this became very, very much a part of who I am. I'm a human being with a number of reactions. I'm engaged with the world. I read extensively. I observe extensively. I meet people all the time. And then I react to what I see, and I react through my thoughts, my speeches, my ideas, my conversations, and my writing. And all of those are different ways of reaching out and saying, can I make a difference through that? And then in my work, I've tried to make a difference. I started off at a very young age at the United Nations, working for refugees, people who'd lost everything, their homes, their countries, their familiar assumptions. Went on from there to peacekeeping in the middle of all the post-Cold War civil wars. I was the person in the UN dealing with the civil war in the former Yugoslavia. And so the whole idea was put your head to the pillow at night, feeling that something you had done or said or written or decided had actually made a difference to human beings' lives. And to my mind, that became my driving force. It's what wakes me up in the morning and keeps me going. And the day I feel that I have passed my use-by date, as they say, my shelf life, and I'm no longer making a difference to anything, that would really be the end of my useful life. I haven't got there yet.
We certainly don't think so as well. I don't know if others do, but I think you know what I'm talking about. But let me come back to this. So UN, of course, serving, because this has something to do with the next question that I want to come. UN, serving the UN, of course, like you mentioned, and then serving your own people as the MP of Thiruvananthapuram 4 times, which I know it's not comparable, but I just thought I'll ask you the question anyway. Which gave you more joy?
Well, look, they're both very different, and yet there's something in common. And the common element is the making a difference. They're very different in the sense that at the UN I was dealing with the world. I was supposed to be serving, if you like, an abstraction called humanity. And many UN people do have that sense of removal that they are very rarely in direct contact with those whom their work or decisions or policies are actually affecting. These are abstractions, figures, concepts on pieces of paper for most of them. I was luckier. I was lucky in that I worked in the UN very little in desk jobs and mainly in action-oriented jobs. Working for refugees, I mean, I was heading at a young age, so young I had to hide my age, heading the UN office in Singapore at the peak of the Vietnamese boat people crisis, when refugees were leaving their country, fleeing communism in small boats, coming out desperately hoping to reach safe land in a freer country, very often ending up drifting aimlessly in the South China Sea and being rescued by ships, who then would bring them into the port of Singapore to offload them. They couldn't carry a boatload of refugees on the ships. They were all cargo ships or trading ships or whatever, or even naval ships. And then they wanted to get rid of the refugees. Somebody had to arrange the formalities, getting them off, and then somebody had to look after them until a permanent solution could be found for them. That was the job of my office. And so I was actually seeing the people I was working for. I mean, it was by relating to the individual human beings in my care. Obviously, I couldn't see every single one when the camp population was at its peak, but I saw enough of them that when I went to a minister or an ambassador and had to persuade them to make some exceptions to their rules and policies to accept somebody for resettlement in their country, I was really talking about human beings. I mean, I have the satisfaction as a ridiculously young man of essentially having created, quote unquote, entire generations of Canadians or French or Americans who wouldn't have been any of those nationalities had I not persuaded somebody to make a rule and break a rule and take them. So those are the kinds of satisfaction that job gave. Similarly in peacekeeping, a little more abstract. I did go out into the war zone several times. I must have made 16, 17 trips while the fighting was going on. I walked close enough to minefields to have been warned off. I've been shot at by snipers. I've been through all the fun of it. But at the same time, a lot of what I was doing was also, diplomatic, bureaucratic work, crafting reports of the UN Secretary General to the Security Council, talking to ambassadors, talking to military officers.
I have been using Pharma Hoppers for the past 7 years, and honestly, I haven't found a better pharma portal yet.
फार्मा हॉपर्स में मिलती है 5000 टॉप फार्मा कंपनीज, 1000 ट्रस्टेड पीसीडी फार्मा कंपनीज और 3000 वेरीफाइड मैन्युफैक्चरर्स, वो भी एकदम रिलायबल.
All companies are properly verified and it is very easy to connect. Pan India delivery, 100% reliable exporters, everything in one place.
तो जुड़िए आप भी इंडिया के मोस्ट ट्रस्टेड फार्मा B2B मार्केट प्लेस से, जहाँ पे आपको मिलते हैं वेरीफाइड और ट्रस्टेड फार्मा कनेक्शंस.
Writing coded instructions to our generals in the field to tell them what to do, what they could not do, what the policy was, crafting that policy. So it was two different kinds of making an impact, but it was still about people I could see, imagine, visualize. That is a great blessing. And even when I ended up in an administrative job as well, I was Under Secretary General for what was then the UN's largest department, the Department of Public Information. We had offices in 88 countries. I had thousands of people working for me around the world. And one of my mandates was to shrink the force. So I knew decisions I had to make were going to affect the lives of people for no fault of their own. But we were under tremendous pressure from the principal member states saying you have to cut costs. And learning how to do that, it's in one way is a purely bureaucratic job, cutting costs, merging offices, streamlining, etc. but to try and do two things along with it. Remember the human beings and see if you can help find solutions for them, and keep people motivated, energized. I mean, I would address my staff every day, and they say things like, you know, when you think of what your job is, don't think you're here to write a press release or make a radio documentary or create an audiovisual, those days, you know, a TV film, because that's all the kinds of things our information department did. Think of yourself as actually trying to save humanity, to make lives better for people around the world, and what you're doing as a means to that end. Stay plugged in, stay connected to the larger purposes of each of the small things you're contributing. And I think it worked. I think people like to feel that connection to a larger objective than the narrow, immediate focus of their job. And that's something that vision that I certainly had is something I wanted to motivate my people with as well. So all of these things we had. Now you come to politics and to Thiruvananthapuram, it's much more direct and immediate. In that there are individuals coming. Every time I'm in Thiruvananthapuram, I will see literally a couple of hundred people a day, possibly more, because people start invading my home from very early in the morning till late at night with their petitions, their requests. Many of them are purely personal. I'll be very honest and say that not everything a politician does is going to be intellectually satisfying or even morally satisfying. I mean, morally, you have to ask yourself the question all day. This chap has come and asked me to recommend his son for a job. Is it fair that I'm recommending this boy merely because his father came, and I'm not recommending somebody else who might be more meritorious? His father didn't come, I mean, or whatever, or he didn't have a father to come, or he didn't think that he should influence the process. These are all difficult questions, but you do your job. You're there to represent people, and often, yes, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's those who come and ask for things who have to be serviced. So there's a lot of that as well. But then there are bigger, more, influential things I can look back upon, which will actually have a bigger abstract effect. For example, when I came for the first time in 2009 to fight an election, I discovered there had been a plan for a bypass to the national highway from Thiruvananthapuram to the Tamil Nadu border, which had actually been stuck for 40 years. The original plan had been conceived 40 years previously. Marker stones had even been laid. But for whatever reason, the highway never took off. It was never built. And I only learned about it. It wasn't even on the agenda of people telling me what were the important issues in Trivandrum until these ordinary people came to me and said, look, sir, this blessed stone has been on my land for 40 years. I can't mortgage my land. I can't sell it. I can't be sure I can invest in improving my house because the government can take away the land anytime. Can you please either get these stones removed, cancel the project, or get it done? And I decided cancelling the project would be a defeat. Let me try and get it done. And it was a terrific effort because I literally had to see 3 different successive highway ministers. I had to see 2 different chairmen of the NHAI, the National Highway Authority, persuade them. I had to chase at every stage of the project. You have no idea the hurdles it takes in our country, at least in the pre-Gadkari era, to actually get a highway built. It was insane. You not only needed to get all of these things done, get the project blessed, get it included in the union budget so that money would be given for land acquisition. You had to get all of that done. Then the land acquisition had to take place in time. There had to be an initial survey and a notification. And then the entire detailed survey, mapping, routing, everything had to be done within 12 months. God knows who came up with this. But if it was not done within 12 months, the whole project would lapse. That had happened twice in those 40 years. So I had to chase everywhere. I mean, I remember at one point, about 6 months into this, discovering no surveys were taking place on the land. So I called and said, what happened? They said, sir, all the surveyors have been transferred to other jobs, all doing other duties. I called the revenue minister, fortunately my party was in power, and said, you can't do this to me. This entire project will lapse unless this blessed thing is done. And he was good enough to sort of recall these surveyors, send them back to their department. I sat down with them and said, you guys have to work overtime if necessary. If this is not done, I will publicly blame you all. And so I got really shook them up. Got it done. It actually went to the stage, and this is not funny because it really needed to be done. I had to call the printing press of the government gazette to ensure that the final printed notification appeared one day before the 12 months expired. Without a gazette notification, the entire project would again have collapsed. It was just incredible. And I know some of my leftist friends who think that development comes from shouting slogans and raising red flags. It doesn't. It comes from this kind of chasing every nut and every bolt and making every call and seeing everyone. And eventually now, there is a 4-lane highway from Thiruvananthapuram to the border. The people who are worrying about the stones on their land have sold their land at a much better price than they would have got 40 years ago. So they're happy. And this road, this highway, is transforming development and is going to change the lives of generations yet unborn. But that gives you a satisfaction. Or on a very different level, persuading my friend, the UAE foreign minister, to give Kerala a UAE consulate and in my constituency. That again has made life so much simpler. Kerala had to get visas from Chennai and Mumbai before. Now they can come to Thiruvananthapuram and get their visas to go to the UAE. Transform lives of thousands of job seekers. Anyway, and so there are big things you can do as an MP. Don't get me wrong. But you have to really make the effort.
Right. The reason I asked, it's not totally connected, but working for UN and then back in your hometown was a lot of Indians, aspire to go abroad, right? And if we talk about the growing power, the economy, the Indian economy, and of course our students see the Nadellas and the Sundar Pichais of the world. So how do you kind of guide them? Do you say, you got to serve your nation, or listen, you got to think of yourself first?
Both. I would say I have never told people you can't go abroad to study, because I did it myself. And it would be wrong, I think, to say, do as I say and not do as I did. So
there are people like Sundar Pichai who stayed on.
Yeah. So that's the challenge.
ITS. The UG Institute was established in 1995. The courses offered are BBA, Bachelor of Business Administration, and BCA, Bachelor of Computer Application. Is increasingly recognized by recruiters as one of the top private institutes in India. To add more fun and enjoyment, Bollywood celebrities, cricketers, bands, singers are invited. Knowledge is power. Join us and experience it.
I honestly have been through every phase of this argument. I started off worrying about the brain drain because I remember going to America as a graduate student, intending to come back all along, and being horrified to realize from the friends I met, contemporaries, that the entire graduating class of every IIT in India that year, the entire graduating class was abroad, almost all of them in America. And almost all of them got scholarships. So the number one ranked student may have got a scholarship to Harvard or MIT or whatever, or Caltech, and the number, whatever it was, 45 or 50 in the class, might have got a scholarship to Georgia Tech or Rensselaer Polytechnic. But there was absolutely nobody left. And I thought, my God, what's going to happen to our country? We're training all these bright, capable, qualified IIT engineers. Then after a few years, after these guys rose to their successes and the successes of Silicon Valley were really striking by the 1990s, then I began thinking, oh no, maybe it is a brain gain, because they were all from that generation that wanted to give back. And many of them were investing in companies in India in the 90s and the beginning of the century. Many of them were sending, of course, money to family and so on and so forth. Many of them, I met people who had set up schools in their home villages in India, etc., etc. So I thought, okay, no, the brain drain turned out to be a brain gain for us. A lot of these people here. And then at that time, that first decade of the 21st century, there were a lot more people coming back. The entire graduating class wasn't staying. Some weren't even going. I remember when I was Minister for Education in the HRD ministry, I was so thrilled to see at IIT Indore a young Muslim boy from a village about 17 miles away from the IIT campus who had received, he was such a brilliant student, he had received scholarships from every major American college to do his graduate studies in astrophysics. He'd got MIT, Harvard, Caltech, but he'd also got another 5 or 6 places in astrophysics in Houston and so on that we've not heard of. And he turned them all down to work under a professor, I think his name was Srivastava, I've got it right, who was himself a tenured professor in America but had come back to Indore to actually do a project with a very sophisticated astrophysical telescope, of which there was only one other of its kind in the world, and that was in Houston. And they were doing this project, cutting edge technology, and they were doing it in India. I'm talking roughly 2010, 11, 12, thereabouts. And I thought, this is now the new story. There would be people turning down America in order to study in India because India is going to offer the best. Sadly, that didn't continue, that didn't take off. I don't know what happened to that particular kid and that particular project. I'm assuming it's still on because I haven't heard otherwise. But it is also true, as Riyadh said, that a lot of young people from Gen Z are heading off to the West without ever wanting to come back. When you talk to them, and I've done so particularly in Kerala, because in Kerala the proportion of those who want to leave is ridiculously high. And you get a wide variety of reasons. One is a lack of opportunities for jobs in India. This is something that every political party has to be concerned about. We have to generate jobs. Our development and growth is striking, but a lot of it is jobless growth. Secondly, there are people who want to go because they say they will feel freer. They are stifled either by the social atmosphere, by the family atmosphere, the parental expectations, tyranny, controls they want to get away from, or from the political atmosphere where they feel insufficiently or they feel popularly intimidated to lead their lives. And it doesn't help that there's so much of the stupid moral policing going on by gundas in our society. In Bangalore, every other month you're reading stories of young boys and girls on a date who are being attacked by goons for holding hands on a street or at a pub or whatever. I mean, this kind of thing really has to be curbed much more effectively. People must be free to lead their own personal lives. It seems preposterous that there are others who presume to tell them what they can and cannot do. But these kinds of factors are, by and large, things we can't do much about unless we really make a conscious effort to do them. Otherwise, people will keep going.
A follow-up question to that. So we have principals and leaders of colleges, the best colleges in India, the best universities, the best schools, B schools. What's your advice, having studied here and studied abroad, and also interacted with people who've studied recently in India and also studied abroad? Is there a gap between the education system here in India, whether it's colleges, B schools, universities, and those that we have, say, in the US or in Britain?
Well, look, it's difficult to say because I have been now away from the education space for a while, and therefore I don't want to presume that my insights are authoritative. I will, and certainly I hope you will ask the same question to those who are actually in college education today, both from the students and from the principals and teachers. But by and large, even if we are catching up much more, and in many, many areas, technology in particular, we seem to be aware of what's happening in the rest of the world and trying to keep pace. And you know, at most we may be a year behind or whatever in getting AI on stream or things like that into our educational system and in the technological campuses and so on. I think the couple of areas in which we are still different. I think there is still an overemphasis on examinations. And I can understand this intellectually. It's partly because how do you differentiate between people when there are so many of them? And in a country with such a large population, a large student population, exams become the only way of measuring quality. And I'm afraid it's not an adequate way. And I say this somebody without any sour grapes because I kept topping.
I need peaceful sleep, Rexa.
Not in my job description.
जब जब इस धरती पर कोई peacefully नहीं सोता, I'll be there. The Sleep Company, India's first and only smart grip mattress. The body goes soft comfort, back go firm support. Peaceful sleep mode on. The Sleep Company.
And I think that's something we need to do much more of because that's what the world today respects and values. And the other thing I would say is as far as the extracurriculars and campus life is concerned, for God's sake, lighten up, principals. Let the kids have a little more freedom. We are still far too strict with everything from closing times, when people have to be in their rooms and in their beds, and how much they can do, what they can't do. Things were actually freer when I was a student. I remember reviving, because it already had existed for a couple of years and died, the Woodhouse Society in college. And because one of the practical jokes had gone awry, and apparently a lady's undergarment was hung up on the college chapel cross. That isn't right either. So anyway, let the principals be a little more relaxed, and in particular about our girls. I remember supporting an agitation at the College of Engineering, Trivandrum, when the girls en masse objected to the fact that they had to be back in their hostels by 7 p.m. and the boys were only required to be back by 10 p.m. And they said, why the discrimination? If we go to a library or an event in town, why can't we stay up until that's over like the boys can? And there was a female college principal. So I asked her, why did you do this? And she said, sir, I cannot change the rule because it's these very girls are protesting. It's their parents who want the rule. And that's, again, something that reflects our society that would not be an issue in the West.
Last, because of the paucity of time, is I'm not going to politicize this, but our Home Minister recently said that Indians would soon be ashamed of speaking English in India. Do you think that's correct? And how important is it to learn English or have a good command of the English language?
Well, look, I think in all fairness, that particular comment had perhaps more to do with his politics than with the social, economic, and work realities of most Indians. At two levels. First, which you already asked in your question, how important is it in the workspace? Inevitably, it's important. Not necessarily that you should be fluent, comfortable, think and dream in English. I'm not asking that. But English is pretty much everybody's second language, at least. And I don't just mean within India, which is already very important because we're a country of diverse languages. And when two Indians meet and they don't know where each other is from, you're safer first attempting to communicate in English than in Hindi or any other language, right? So, and then you figure out that you may have an Indian language in common, you can relax into that. But there is that. But there's also the fact that in an increasingly globalizing world, almost any job you do, you'll have consumers and customers who don't speak your mother tongue. Whatever your mother tongue may be, Hindi, Malayalam, anything you want. And therefore, to have a language in common, it has to be English. You might be connecting with a German customer online. That German, his first language is German, your first language is Malayalam or whatever, Marathi. But both of you should have enough English that you can actually get your work done. So English is an indispensable tool in a globalized world with increasing consumers, customers, clients, and even friends and social contacts accessible that way. But the second thing, and I thought we'll talk a little more about Gen Z and language, so I read up to make sure that I wasn't completely out of touch. And it turned out that that one of the things that's striking about Gen Z language in India today is the evolution of an English-based hybrid. That even people of Hindi mother tongue or Punjabi mother tongue or whatever are speaking to each other in a kind of English, which may be Hindi but will have English words, or maybe English but will have Hindi words or Punjabi words, or whatever the sort of argot is in the area where they are living in. If it's Delhi, you will get a kind of Gen Z informal conversation, which is a mixture, indistinguishable mixture of Hindi and English, with some Punjabi thrown in. And that's what they're speaking to each other. And there are versions of this in Calcutta with Bengali, and in Bangalore with Kannada, and in Bombay with Marathi, and so on. There's this transformation taking place at that level of the way in which language is used for informal communication, which also has injected English into everybody's vocabulary. It'll soon reach a stage where nobody in India, and remember 800 million of our Indians already connected to all of this on their mobile phones, right? The internet. When I was entering politics, it was estimated that the entire connected population in India was below 10%. People with access to the internet, even those who went once a week to an internet cafe, were less than 10%. Today, it is about 65. That's probably an undercount. It may be higher because more and more people have found a mobile phone indispensable. You read stories about working class people, and there's a reference to their mobile phones. There's a transformation now. And in that mobile phone, what are they seeing? They're seeing reels that have been made by these Gen Z people. They're seeing messages, conversation, they're hearing other people talk. And that's going to influence everybody. We will soon get to a point where even somebody who believes he doesn't know English actually has learned English words through all these, through osmosis, as a linguistic osmosis this way.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor, on behalf of all the students and those who look after them and nurture them, and on behalf of the week, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much. As you saw my colleague coming up, I'm supposed to be in front of the Gandhi statue at Parliament protesting right now, so I better run. Take care, all of you. Thanks. Bye.
अपनों से दूर होते हैं आप कभी कभी, इसीलिए अब टेस्ट बुक कीजिए कहीं से भी।
GoDaddy has the perfect hosting plan for any website, from low-cost shared hosting to your own virtual server. Every plan comes with a 99.9% uptime guarantee along with a free domain name and award-winning support. No wonder we are the world's #1 web host. Unlock your online potential today with GoDaddy.
The new building is rather like a soulless new convention hall.
Yeah.
Even while these BJP disruptions are going on, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was inviting the same leaders to breakfast to discuss what issues were troubling them. Is that now never bothered to come and talk to the opposition. Now we have had a government which introduced terms like anti-national into the discourse. If you disagree with them, you're anti-national, you're unpatriotic. The BJP benches all stand on their feet and start saying Modi, Modi, Modi. It's kind of almost... How did the name India come about? It came about because the people beyond the river Sindhu, the Indus.
My last question, very important. What's the canteen food like? Important. I hope you're not announcing your retirement from politics. Dr. Tharoor, I wonder how many days of the year are you traveling?
Probably far more than is good for me. I mean, I've lost count, but certainly over 100 flights a year. And
100 flights a year?
And not to mention countless hours on the road, especially in Kerala, where we don't have enough flight connectivity. So I'm on the move a lot.
Right.
More than is entirely good for me.
What does that tell you about India?
Oh, I think
people you meet and, you know, such a diverse...
That's what keeps me going, is I find myself energized by the audiences. The questions are usually solicit questions that I don't really believe in monologues.
Yeah.
And I found that the audiences, what's on their mind, their interests vary, but are usually of extremely interesting quality. And I find this perhaps in some ways more rewarding than sitting in Parliament and watching it being disrupted.
Which was actually my next question, because this is your fourth term. It's a new building. Is it a new environment as well, psychologically, socially, culturally? Do you get to gossip as much as you did in the old Parliament? What's it like, actually?
Look, I mean, there are really two questions on that. I mean, is the new building different from the old one?
Yeah.
Yes, it's certainly lacking the kind of character the old building had, which was redolent of history. The whole atmosphere went back, you know, the first built in the 1920s to house the British Legislative Chamber and the British Raj, and then You look at all the oak paneling and the old portraits and the lower ceilings, which give you a greater sense of intimacy.
Right.
Yes, it was cramped, it was uncomfortable. You couldn't get up to go to the toilet without having to trip over half a dozen colleagues.
But there was a certain charm in it, right?
But there was a certain charm, and of course there was the central hall where people met and gossiped, as you put, and so on. Now, people are people, individuals don't change, so the gossiping may continue, but in less convenient circumstances. And I can tell you that the new building is rather like a soulless new convention hall.
Yeah.
And we have seen convention halls like this all over the country since Vigyan Bhavan came in and set the standard in Delhi. And I would say this is not an improvement on that. Perhaps with time it will acquire some character by use, by development of new traditions. But at this stage, there is a certain soullessness to it. I'm very conscious of what Justice Ramasubramanian said about soul, and he and I
and the spirit.
agree on the universality of the Atman, but I think that we can use the word soul in English metaphorically to speak about spirit plus something else, spirit plus a sense of indefinable character and identity that we speak of when we speak of the soul of India, the soul of Parliament, and this is still a soulless building. So on that issue, I would say that it's the newness is a disadvantage. In terms of convenience, it is certainly in some ways very convenient. For one thing, it's easy to get up and go and come back and so on. Remember, you have more leg room, you have more sitting room, the space is much bigger. It is less convenient in that there is no central hall anymore. There is a cafeteria, which is a good walk, including through some public spaces to get to it. There are kind of lounges on both houses, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, where you can sit around, but very few people are seen talking to each other there. They're usually immersed because there's Wi-Fi there, and you're not allowed to use Wi-Fi in your chambers, and therefore you rush off to these lounges and check your messages or whatever. It's not yet the same sort of atmosphere. And finally, I think the real problem at the moment with Parliament is that over the years, and I'm not being partisan and blaming just the BJP, I would say over the last 20 years or so, we have seen a steady decline in what Parliament used to be or even should be. And it's now become increasingly a disappointing place to sit and work. It is characterized by very few high-quality debates. It is marked by excessively frequent disruptions. It no longer gives you the kind of sense which I must admit was already beginning to go down the tubes when I first came into Parliament 16 years ago, but which has been accelerating its decline since. It fails to give you the sense of the temple of democracy, the principal chamber of accountability of the government to the people, all of those things. Increasingly, what should be happening in Parliament is attempted to happen in the television studios, but the quality of that is another matter altogether, and you've been there, so I won't go there. So the net result is our democracy is suffering because of this decline in quality.
But there are still some high-quality speeches that we see. Maybe nothing of the stature of, say, when Vajpayee quit, after the 13-day government, or say when Omar said, I'm a Muslim, I'm an Indian. I mean, that 2008 speech, I think, is still very memorable. But there still are people who make an impact. Who would you say are your top 2-3 parliamentarians of today?
No, that would be invidious. I don't think it's right for me to pick specific colleagues. Everyone has had good moments. Some have not had a chance to have a good moment because of what's going on. And I will not name individuals. I will agree with you. There are people with great debating skill and ability who are there, but who often don't have an opportunity to showcase those skills enough. And yes, there are the occasional speeches with a certain virality on YouTube. And I've had a few myself that have gone fairly popular on YouTube and are still going around. But the truth is that for the most part, if you look back, say to my childhood, you had a number of people who acquired importance out of all proportion to the strength of their parties in Parliament, only because of the way in which they use the floor of Parliament to challenge the likes of Jawaharlal Nehru and
Yeah, of
Indira
course,
Gandhi.
Feroz
And so on.
Gandhi, Pilu Modi.
You mentioned Vajpayee. There's exactly Pilu Modi. There's Aminu Masani.
I think Pilu Modi coming
Ramnath,
wearing that placard saying "I'm a CIA agent" is still something of quite iconic.
That was memorable, but not particularly, you know. He was cleverer than that, and he said some very funny things. Early on, there was Ramnath Lohia, there was Ram Manohar Lohia, I beg your pardon. There was Nath Pai, George Fernandes in his own way, Madhu Limaye. There were a number of people who really made their political reputations because of their effective use of Parliament. And for that matter, Feroz Gandhi challenging his own prime minister. Now, you can't imagine that happening today, where the whip system has made it impossible for parliamentarians to express their conscience when they disagree with their own parties. So you've got to a point. I mean,
Has that happened to you?
So, Kaveri, when I was a private citizen, I mean, after I left the UN and before I came into politics, Somnath Chatterjee invited about 15, 16 of us, so-called round table of eminent citizens, included people like Mr. Narayana Murthy, Shyam Benegal, me, a few others.
A few public intellectuals that we have.
From various walks of life. Yes, some public intellectuals, some scholars, even some retired or about to retire politicians, like, if I remember right, Vasant Sathe was there, but then he was no longer in active politics. And he asked us the question, as citizens, can you advise me how we can improve Parliament? I remember we had 2 days of discussions, and one of the things that we all unanimously said, not almost, we all unanimously said was, you have to take action to crack the whip on disruptions, because why should anyone be allowed to disrupt Parliament? To which his answer was that in our democracy, disruptions are often the only resort for an opposition to make its presence heard, and if I were to follow the rule book and expel them from Parliament, it would be undemocratic. And therefore, that option is not available. And then we had the same thing later when Meera Kumar was Speaker, and again, there was very serious amounts of disruption going on. And she had the same view, that she had the right in theory to expel, but she didn't feel it would be right to do that because Parliament had to be allowed to function.
Someone should tell Dhankar and Om Birla that.
It's very different now. So it's somewhat different now. Let me explain the difference.
Yeah.
Part of the factor was that in those days, of course, the opposition was more numerous. Yeah. So if you kept expelling people, you would essentially end up depriving yourself of almost half the House. And you would not have been able then to truly convince the public that you were acting democratically, but also for the ruling parties of the UPA. I think there was a presumption that in the interest of democracy, it was better to give in to the opposition in the interest of making the system work. That was, I think, the old school DNA.
Yeah.
The DNA that said, for example, that your parliamentary affairs minister would spend more time in the opposition benches talking to parliamentary leaders of the opposition parties than on his own side of the House. That was the way in which the Congress and I must
people
say,
like Pramod Mahajan, I think.
absolutely, Pramod Mahajan, when he was Vajpayee's parliamentary affairs minister, Kamal Nath and Ghulam Nabi Azad and the UPA, they would spend more time on the other side and they'd be talking and schmoozing, if you like, with the opposition leaders, but getting things done.
Right.
And even while these BJP disruptions are going on, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was inviting the same leaders to breakfast to discuss what issues were troubling them and so on. What has changed in the last 10 years, you can say it's a difference of degree rather than a difference of kind, is that now, first of all, especially in the first 2 terms, the BJP had an overwhelming majority. And they really felt that even if the entire opposition either walked out or was expelled, they would still have such a large number of people in the House, 2/3 almost, that it wouldn't matter and no one would consider them undemocratic. Maybe that's what they thought, but certainly their speakers had much less compunction about expulsions and much less willingness to adjourn. They would just let the bills be passed without debate amid the din rather than, so they were not so worried about appearing undemocratic. The second problem in the course of the last 10 years is the parliamentary affairs ministers, until this 3rd term, never bothered to come and talk to the opposition. I mean, they would literally be issuing instructions, as it were, from the government benches. And so the result you saw was that there was a complete breakdown of communications and trust between government and opposition. We hoped that with the somewhat more close results of the 2024 elections, that there'd be more cooperation. I must say that there's been certainly a little more dialogue than there used to be, and a little more effort on their part to see what the opposition wants. But there's still been an awful lot of disruption, and there's still been a much less productive approach to the work of the nation. I have been dismayed to see in my 3 terms and the beginning of my 4th that increasingly the government just sees Parliament as a notice board to issue its pronouncements and as a rubber stamp of its own side, reinforced by the anti-defection law and the whip system, which means that even if there are MPs on their side who don't agree with some provisions or who are willing to see the merit in some proposed amendments, they'll still be steamrollered through. And the result of that, I think, has begun to undermine Parliament. You see, what was interesting was that in the old days, and I'm somebody who for my PhD, I read up hundreds of pages of parliamentary debates in the 60s.
What was your PhD on?
It was in Indian foreign policy making, so I was reading principally foreign policy debates. But when you're going through them, it's inevitable you get distracted by other debates as well. There's so much of rich material there. And I must say that it was very impressive to see both the quality of the argument, the intensity, and there was never the sense that there seems to be now, well, in any case, you're going to lose the vote, so how does it matter? I remember one particular memorable line of Vajpayee at a time when there were very few Jansangh members in Parliament.
When it was 2?
Well, no, not when it was 2. It was a little early because my PhD was written before. They were reduced to 2. It was the Jansangh days. They had a hand for maybe 40, 50, thereabouts, or 30, 40. But anyway, so he said to Indira Gandhi once, "Madam, we have the arguments, you have the votes." And that was, so, but he said, I will still place my arguments on the record. I want the nation to hear what I have to say. And this is part of the logic of what this is all about. But part of the situation today, I think, is that there's much less opportunity. Many in the opposition seem to prefer disruption to debate, feeling that debate is futile because in any case, the government will get its way. The government has never taken the trouble in its entire, this 2 terms and 1 year of the BJP, they never once admitted an opposition adjournment motion, an opposition amendment to a bill, an opposition logical argument. I mean, it seems silly, but I can tell you when, for example, I remember when Ghulam Nabi Azad was health minister and a suggestion was made on a particular bill by a doctor. I can't remember which party, but the doctor said that there's something in this bill which could have been improved if you had done this, this, and this, because this is not correct. The bill had been introduced. He took it back, discussed with his officials, amended the bill, and brought it back a few days later. Now, this has never happened in the BJP. And I can remember a very trivial example, but in the first few months of the BJP government back in 2014, they were still passing some bills which had been prepared and all the legwork had been done in the last days of the UPA. One of them was a bill which required companies, factories, establishments of a certain number of people or more to inform their workers of their legal rights in writing. So when that bill came forward, obviously in the previous government, I was only confined to my ministry, so I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know about this bill. But when the BJP put that bill forward, I spoke up and offered an amendment saying, look, this is an excellent idea, but remember that in our country, there's still large numbers of illiterate factory workers and so on. In addition to providing them their rights in writing, can't we also have a provision that they should be informed orally of what these rights are? And literally, I could see a majority of the BJP MPs nodding their heads in agreement while I said this. But when the bill came to a vote, the whip was immediately exercised, and the entire lot of them voted for that bill, which I think could have been improved by adding the question of oral rights if you were serious about conveying rights to workers. Now, this is a simple example and a trivial one because it doesn't change anything much that's fundamental, but it raises the question of, do opposition views matter? And increasingly the impression given to the opposition by the government is they don't matter. Now, all of this is bad for the country, bad for democracy. And the other thing, very sadly, we've seen is a breakdown of trust, not just a breakdown of communication between the two sides. There is a sense in which, honestly, in every democracy, government and opposition must start off with the basic presumption that each has the best interests of the nation at heart, but that they disagree about how to achieve it and what ideology to pursue in achieving it. That's what democracy is. Otherwise, you should just overthrow the system, attempt a revolution. It wouldn't be democracy. In democracy, Everyone is agreed that ultimately the welfare of India and Indians is what matters. We disagree on how to get there. That's somehow gone. Now we have had a government which has introduced terms like anti-national into the discourse. If you disagree with them, you're anti-national, you're unpatriotic, you're treasonous in your conduct. And for the other side, there is increasingly this perception that they see themselves as the doubted, the doughty Pandavas, the embodiments of virtue against the evil machinations of the government, who are sort of this metaphorical and largely numerous, but adharmic Kauravas. Now, this kind of moral black and white on both sides means that you no longer just see yourself as adversaries, you see yourself as enemies.
Enemies.
And that can't be good for democracy either.
I wonder, when you meet privately across party lines, do the BJP MPs express this kind of view to you as well? Are they happy with what is going on?
Look, first of all, we meet much less together informally than we used to. I can tell you, during UPA time, it was entirely common, for example, for socializing during parliaments to involve people
regardless
of all parties.
of what you said on the floor of the House, you were still
you were constantly in each other's homes and each other's events and so on. Very much less of it now. Yes, people will still attend, say, weddings or occasions like that across party lines, but just sort of going over for a dinner kind of thing, much less. In fact, I remember in my innocence early on, I invited a couple of BJP MPs. One or two first accepted and didn't come. And then I said, what happened? And then they felt very awkward. They said, look, we've been told not to come.
Really?
And then subsequently, I remember I made one more stab at it with somebody whom I had had very friendly interactions with, who was an MP on the other side and later became a minister of state. And she said, look, it's better for you not to invite me and it's better for me not to accept, quote unquote. And
we'll spend the day guessing who it is.
So there's very much less of that sort of communication. And I must say that I think something is lost in that process. I never used to refuse an invitation from a BJP MP when I was a Congress MP or a Congress minister. Today, there are no invitations that I'm aware of by BJP ministers to Congress people. And I remember one or two ministers who keep saying, you must come home, we must get together. And so I'd say, yes, yes, yes. Never actually, the
typical Delhi polite
never actually follows.
Yes.
So I'm not complaining. I don't really need the extra food, God knows, or the extra drink. But I think what I really value is, as you said, this informal conversation. So you have to ask them yourself, Kaveri, what they think. But I will say that there has also been a problem on both sides going back perhaps a generation now, 20, 25 years, where the philosophy has been on the question of parliamentary disruptions, where you stand depends on where you sit. So the very same BJP MPs who, while in opposition, used to spin elaborate theories about disruption was good parliamentary politics.
Yes.
Arun Jaitley wrote articles
about
it. Sushma Swaraj, Venkaiah Naidu. I can quote even L.K. Advani. They all said disruption is a legitimate parliamentary tactic, and it strengthens democracy. All this sort of stuff. When the government is acting with misguided ways, why shouldn't we do this? The very same people came to power in 2014 and started bashing disruption as anti-national and so on. So, I mean, you can't take that. I don't know how many of us here have been to missionary schools, but you learn the golden rule, right? Do unto others how you would have them do unto you. Well, in Parliament now, the golden rule is do unto others what they have done unto you. So now they're very busy. They're very busy saying every time that even within the opposition, some of us will raise our voice saying this disruption is not a good idea. They'll say, but look what they did to us. And that becomes ultimately an impossible argument to refute.
Does the atmosphere of Lok Sabha change when the Prime Minister makes a rare appearance, which he does?
It's far too rare. That's another serious problem. And when Jawaharlal Nehru became Prime Minister, he made it a point to attend every single day.
I believe he had a microphone in his room to listen into the...
That you can have. You can have TV sets in your offices now.
Of course you can.
So you can follow
But I mean, at that time, I suppose it was unusual.
And he came for every single day of every session. What is more, he obliged his cabinet to attend and he obliged the senior officials to attend. Today, the senior officials of the relevant ministries have to be there. Poor chaps, they have no choice. But I can tell you that ministers are only on a rotational duty basis. And the Prime Minister hardly ever comes. In fact, at one point, I accurately calculated and wrote a column about 7-8 years into his term that he has actually spent more time in parliaments abroad than in the Lok Sabha, of which he was an elected member. Because he was making these speeches to countries' parliaments, but he was not prepared to attend his own Lok Sabha.
But Parliament itself is sitting for far fewer days, right?
That's whose fault is that? Yeah. It's the government that decides the sittings. We have gone from, in the days, in Nehru's first term, it was over 150 days a year.
Now it's 55.
And it averaged throughout the 1950s about 135 to 155 days. In the 60s, it was slightly less, but not much less. And it carried on right up to the beginning of the century as roughly in that ballpark. Today, it's really gone down. And in fact, I remember when Modi ji was elected, somebody telling me, do you know that the Gujarat Assembly only met for 56 days last year? Watch out. And I said, come on, they can't do that to Parliament. And they seem to be in the process of doing exactly that to Parliament. And I'm not even sure the Gujarat Assembly is even managing 56 days anymore.
Sorry, I interrupted you. I was asking you also about the mood. What is it like when he actually does?
Well, first of all, a number of things have changed. He walks in and the BJP benches all stand on their feet and start saying Modi, Modi, Modi. It's kind of almost, I'm sorry, it's 1930s Germany practically, this kind of atmosphere. We haven't seen this before. Yes, standing up was there. When Manmohan Singh walked in, the Congress benches would stand up, but there was no applause, there was no sloganeering, there was no shouting. We're just showing respect by standing up, which is an old culture and tradition. But this business of shouting slogans and waving hands and so on, it goes on sometimes for 3, 4, 5 minutes, is a bit embarrassing. But thereafter, yes, their attention is focused on the presence of the Prime Minister, partially because it is so rare, and partially because when he speaks, he is a compelling speaker, but he doesn't often choose to speak. In fact, we have this very unusual situation only under Mr. Modi, when questions addressed to the Prime Minister himself is not only Prime Minister, but has ministries under him directly, are answered by the Minister of State in his office. So Jitendra Singh, the question says, will the Prime Minister tell Parliament, blah, 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 and Jitendra Singh, the Minister of State, will stand up and answer the question. Whereas in our time, very often, Dr. Manmohan Singh would himself answer the question.
History will judge him kinder, etc.
Well, he's already judging him more kindly, I think, than his peers did. Yeah. So these are, again, all things. Look at one of the most popular things in the British House of Commons on which we were supposed to be initially modelled was indeed Prime Minister's question time.
Yeah.
We don't have anything like that. Arguably, we never did, so it's not just BJP's fault, but we don't get... But this time the Prime Minister doesn't even answer normal question hour on the questions to the ministries that he's officially in charge of. Then why is he in charge of them? That's really troubling. The other things we don't have that other parliaments have that might perhaps, for example, I've even suggested in an article somewhere that what we could do, for example, is to borrow this idea that several Western parliaments have of saying that one day a week the opposition will determine.